Good evening. It is Monday, May 5th. This is the Guilford Board of Education meeting. First item, I would like to welcome you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Before we dive into the agenda, I do have a request of my colleagues to add a very brief executive session to the end of this meeting, if we could, for a brief discussion of contract negotiations. Is there someone who'd be willing to make such a motion?
I'll make a motion to add executive session to the end.
Thank you. Second, wonderful. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, terrific. So we will add a brief executive session to the end. The only other thing I will note for the agenda, 9.2, to act on a Board of Education statement on equity and social justice. I am going to ask that we put that on hold until all board members are able to attend a meeting. We had 2 board members who are unable to attend tonight. And I think it's going to be important that we all get to participate in that discussion. So that's just a note about that. So the first, next item is action on minutes. You'll note that there are 2 sets of February minutes that were carried over for the last meeting per my request. So tonight I am going to first ask for a motion to accept minutes from Monday, February 22nd. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Dick Hirsch. John Delventura, second. Any corrections or questions about these February 22nd minutes?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Sands.
On page 3, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th full paragraph, the second line says is made for Adams and the high school to go to, should be 4 days instead of 5 days.
Okay. It was part of your question. I understand that. Okay. Any other corrections to these minutes? All right, hearing none. All in favor of accepting these corrected minutes, please raise your hand. Okay, that's everybody, so thank you. Is there a motion to accept the February 25th special meeting minutes? Mr. Sands first, Mrs. Rader second, thank you. Any corrections or comments? All right, seeing none, all in favor of accepting these minutes, please raise your hand or say aye. All right, I see everybody. Thank you. And then the third set of minutes, March 8th, our regular meeting. Is there a motion to accept these minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Rader, second. Any comments or corrections on these minutes? I do have one on page 4, at the top of page 4. This is in the context of the discussion around Connecticut nutrition standards. The 4th line down, I believe, should be June 30th, 2022, following the July 1st, 2021. I believe that should be a year. Any other corrections? All right, hearing none. All in favor of accepting these minutes as corrected?
Aye.
Okay, terrific. I see all board members raising their hands. So we are all set with approving minutes for tonight. It is now time for a public forum on topics on the board agenda. I don't know if there is anyone who wishes to address the board.
I see nobody requesting to do
Yeah.
so in the Q&A or chat boxes, Dr. Balistraci.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Hirsch, who is the reviewer for the expenditures for the month of March.
In terms of the budget summary, let me point out a couple of things there. With regard to the excess cost grant, we originally requested several $100,000 more than $1 million, that is $1.2 million, and received $985,753, which is 83.5% of our request. That's compared to our usual return of 69%. So we've been given a higher percentage of reimbursement, but we're also need to note that this does not mean that the next level of our second reimbursement will be as high as this was. So we may still end up breaking even at the end of the year. Under tuition, we have we're doing better on tuition than we projected, but in part because we also have gotten a higher reimbursement on this from the excess cost grant. With regard to capital, 2/3 way down the page, that's for a new maintenance vehicle and some tech equipment, including replacement of Chromebooks. And under COVID, we have received under the First Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER, $117,000. We have submitted claims for a second ESSER relief fund. We've requested $520,000 from ESSER 2. And that's where those funds are coming from. We learned in the Operations Committee earlier, there may be a possibility of an ESSER 3 funding that may cover ongoing expenses in the next couple of years. With regard to the warrants, on page 3 under CIRMA, the Connecticut Interlock Risk Management Association line, we show a payment of $107,000, which is our quarterly payment for the fourth quarter of this year to that insurance fund, and then an additional $45,000 below that for our auto and property insurance. So those are just large payments, but there are our normal quarterly payments. Another major expense is on page 5 under Gengris, a payment for the truck that we bought, $50,623. And finally, under Treasurer, page 9, we see a $844,000 payment to the town of Guilford, which is our monthly payment to fund jointly with our town our medical cost account. So those are some of the larger amounts or the ones we don't normally see.
Or as you noted, for instance, the medical expense is part of our regular.
Yes.
Right, our regular. So the expenditures for the month of March, just for the minute record, were $4,977,874.72. Expenditures and encumbrances through the end of March were 68.7% of the budget as compared to 69.29% in the prior year. Again, as Dr. Hirsch mentioned, we discussed the financials and the warrants extensively in the Operations Committee. That happened earlier this evening. But do any of my colleagues have any questions before we approve this report? All right, seeing none, May I ask for a motion to approve the expenditures? Mr. Sands, motion. Second, Dr. Best. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, terrific. That's everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Hirsch. We are at the point of the agenda where we report on any communications that we've received. I have not actually received any communications over the past couple of weeks, but I don't know if anyone else has that are worth noting. All right. Dr. Freeman, I think you noted to me earlier today that our student representatives were not able to join us. Is that correct?
That is correct. Both of our reps send their apologies. They both ended up having conflicting obligations this evening. We do not have a student rep report.
Okay, so we will certainly look forward to seeing them next month. And so that brings us to your report, Dr. Freeman. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start by just following up a little bit on what Dr. Hirsch had mentioned. It does appear that at this time, when we take into account the unbudgeted, unexpected for spending that was related to the COVID pandemic, this would be spending on things like PPE and plexiglass dividers and tents and additional storage facilities, as well as additional spending related to staffing. Remember that this year we brought on additional custodial staffing and substitute teacher staffing and health aid staffing, lunch and recess supports, as well as bringing in additional teaching positions to help to bring class sizes down. When those additional unanticipated expenses are set off against some savings that were recognized or some costs that were avoided in this budget because of opportunities or because of events that could not be that we couldn't fulfill under the conditions within the pandemic. And then when those are offset further by the approximately $1 million that we brought in from the CARES Act, ESSER, and then ESSER 2 grant funds, it does appear that Guilford Public Schools will be over budget this year. We are currently projecting that we anticipate to be over budget by approximately $300,000 when the unanticipated expenses are balanced off by the grant funding as well as the unanticipated cost avoidances. We will be meeting with the Board of Finance in their April meeting, following up with them to give them an update in their May meeting. And it does appear at this time that in June, we will be going before the Board of Education to request an additional appropriation to cover those expenses through the close of this year. The Board of Finance has been aware. We went into this school year knowing that we expected the COVID costs to push us over our approved budget. The Board of Finance has been very supportive in encouraging us every step of the way to be sure that we met our student needs, that we kept our schools safe and our students healthy. And in fact, we at this point consider this position to be a very positive position. To add some context to that, at the end of last year, the schools were able to return $335,000 in unexpended funds that we returned at the end of last year. So it appears that the additional request this year will be lower than the unexpended funds that we returned last year. Again, we consider that to be a very positive position that we're in. We are very appreciative of the additional grant funds that we received this year and very appreciative of the support that we've received by the Board of Finance. We will continue to update the operations committee of the Board of Ed as we approach the end of the school year. And as I said, we'll begin formally updating the Board of Finance with numbers attached to these projections, and we'll make that request for any additionally needed funds in June. I know that we spoke about this in operations.
Absolutely. Although I would like to reiterate my comment from the operations committee, which is I think this is really, really terrific news. Certainly it was a priority of Dr. Freeman, you and your staff to keep students safe as we schooled them through a pandemic so that really important expenses were made, and they weren't small expenses sometimes. So it is, I think we were wondering what it would look like at this time, and certainly it's excellent news both because of grant funding, because of other opportunities for savings, that the appropriation at this point looks like it will be certainly smaller than I expected. So,
Agreed.
other questions for Dr. Freeman on this topic or comments? Excellent. Again, we did talk about it in operations as well. All right, and you're up again.
Thank you. Also wanted to update the board and the community about where we stand with current cases. When last we spoke in public, I was in the middle of noting for the board that we were experiencing an increase in local cases and an increase in cases within the schools. In fact, in the week that ended on March 26th, we had tallied 26 student cases, 26 cases of students who were positive, and 5 adult cases. I do want to make sure that I'm being really clear for the community. Those 26 positive student cases did not all necessarily impact students within the school. Some of those positive 26 students might be students who have been availing themselves of fully at-home learning. Other students might have identified or been identified as positive on a Monday, early Monday, in which case the 2-day look back that we look for exposure would not have pushed them back into a situation where other students may have been exposed. So it was 26 positive enrolled Guilford Public School students. That does not mean that there were 26 cases that impacted other students. It did result in, however, 266 quarantines. So those 26 students, there were a number of them that did impact other students in the schools. And that meant that across those students who had impact, there were 266 other students who were identified as likely close contacts and were therefore directed to quarantine and to keep themselves from in-person learning, in most cases for a period of 10 days from the initial exposure. The good news is that in the week ending April 2nd, this past Friday, those numbers are down dramatically. From 26 positive student cases the week before, we tallied 8 positive student cases last week. From 5 positive adults, we tallied 2 last week. So the positive cases this immediate past week were a third of the total that we experienced the week prior to that. Now, again, those 8 total students may not have all impacted the schools. They did, however, result in 135, again, students who were identified as likely close contacts and therefore directed to learn from home and to quarantine. As we continue to move forward, I do want to note for the community that we've already on our website have a 2-week look back. The numbers that I just quoted from are on our website. They are available under the COVID-19 tab. They will live under the COVID dashboard, and parents, family, community members will be able to look and see those numbers broken down by school location as well as by adult and student positive case, and then adult and student possible likely close contact and required quarantine. Additional good news is that as we move through today, we will have more than half of our staff, our adult staff associated with the schools, who have received their 2nd vaccine dose by the end of today. And by the time we return from April vacation, we will have over 90% of our staff members who have received both doses. And in fact, a significant number of our staff who will be 2 weeks beyond that, which means that they will now count as fully vaccinated. It means that the situations we experienced in November and December, where positive cases resulted in numbers of staff needing to be quarantined and therefore resulting in the whole school needing to shift to distance learning, those cases will not continue. With staff who are now fully vaccinated, they will be excused from the need from quarantining. They will no longer be directed to quarantine. So while we will still be quarantining to make sure that we're protecting students in the building, we will no longer be experiencing a situation where we will be forced to shift to distance learning because of an inability to staff the buildings properly. And I do want to talk about the quarantining of students. There has been quite a bit of conversation about the continued practice of quarantining students. The CDC and the state of Connecticut are still strongly recommending. In fact, I mean, they expect schools to be identifying positive cases and then quarantining so that we make sure that we're not continuing the possibility of that spread within the schools. Let me say, we understand, we know that asking students to quarantine has an impact on those students. We know that it is disruptive. We know that it is upsetting. We know that there are students who may miss out on important schooling and important events. And we absolutely wish that there was some other tool, but right now it appears that masking and this reactionary quarantining they continue to be the best tools that we have at our disposal to make sure that we don't bring spread into the school and that we're not transferring this virus student to student and therefore requiring more students to be out of school. We don't like quarantining. We have developed our process over these last several weeks with more support being offered from the town. The town has brought on new contact tracing positions, and we have very recently just begun to more actively include our school nurses into the process of contact tracing and helping to identify who those likely close contacts are. We are attempting to be much more targeted in the quarantines that do flow from positive cases. But I do want to say, while we recognize the impact and we want to support our students through that impact, we are committed to continuing the practice of quarantining. We do believe it is one of the most effective tools we have to keep our schools safe, that and masking. In addition to that, we also continue to recognize that it is in most cases, in many cases, it appears that it is activity outside of the school that is resulting in infections, and then we identify those cases and it impacts the school day. Earlier today, I sent a communication to families speaking about the upcoming April vacation. We are asking families to please make sure that they continue to be vigilant as we move through these next few weeks of schooling. Our numbers have started to come down, at least over this last week. The last thing that we want to see is to see those numbers begin to trend up again because of behaviors in which students engage over this coming April break. We know that everyone is tired. We know that everyone is frustrated. We know that this has been a challenging school year. But if we can make it through these last 10 weeks, we can finish the year strong with students in school for in-person learning and reduce the number of quarantines. We are asking families to continue to be careful and vigilant over this April vacation. And specifically, we are asking families who engage in travel to follow the CDC guidelines for travel. And those guidelines include that if you travel out of state for more than 24 hours, that you have your child tested and that you secure a negative COVID test before returning that child to school. So again, I want to reiterate that for families who choose to travel over the April vacation, we are asking that before you return your child to classes, to in-person schooling on April 19th, that you secure a negative COVID test. That could be a PCR or a rapid test. But we do want to ask every family to share in the responsibility of keeping all of our other children safe. If your family travels out of state, the best thing that you can do, not just for your child, but for all of the children who will come into contact with your child during the coming school days, is to secure that negative test and know that your child is negative. We're not asking for families to submit those negative tests to the school system. We're simply asking for you to ensure that you have it and to know that if you traveled, your child is negative before sending that child to school. In some cases, the school nurse may reach out to you. Students often come in back from a vacation and share their activities with us. Please know that if your child comes to school and shares with classmates and shares with teachers and shares in school that you had traveled outside of the state, The school nurse is going to call you, ask you if you are aware of my communication this afternoon, and ask if you have secured that negative test. In absence of the negative test, the CDC is recommending, and we are encouraging every family to keep your child in a distance setting for 14 days following the travel, to make sure that your child isn't exposing anybody else to a possible positive COVID infection that may have been picked up through travel. Again, we understand the weight and the impact of that, but it's going to be the best way for us to avoid another spike in cases, as we saw not this immediate past week, but in the 2 and 3 weeks before this week, where we were processing 26 or 30 cases a week, and we were therefore impacting hundreds of students with the cascades of close contact and quarantining. Again, we seem to have gotten over this latest blip. Guilford wasn't the only community. It spread across the shoreline. It seems that has been controlled. Our goal is to make sure that we keep it controlled, and we are asking every family to please help by watching the dashboard that we've provided, and by making sure that if you travel out of state in this coming week, that you make sure your child is negative before sending your child to school. And Dr. Balistraci, the only other item I wanted to mention, I do want to remind the community as we go into this April break that on April 20th, the 4 elementary schools and Baldwin will once again be placed into a distance learning condition, and that is to accommodate voting during the townwide referendum in 4 of our schools, 3 of our elementary schools and Baldwin. Adams and the high school, who are not voting locations, will be open to in-school instruction, in-person instruction on April 20th. It is our strong hope that April 20th becomes the last day that we need to see an unscheduled distance learning day put into place. And if everybody contributes and helps in the way that I've just been discussing, it's my strong hope that that will be the last unscheduled distance learning day that we need to announce in Guilford as we finish this school year. And
Excellent.
that concludes my report, Dr. Balistraci.
All right. Does anyone have questions, comments, additional? Go ahead, Mrs. Sullivan.
Just 2 quick things regarding the travel and being off. It's probably, of course, it's very important. All those details are very important. It's also, probably likely that families who are traveling are going to travel in their family unit. So we don't want to ignore that people who don't leave the state, who maybe stay around Guilford and hang out with friends or do whatever, have just as much of a chance of seeing too many people. That may not be a great choice. So just a reminder that not leaving the state doesn't mean you shouldn't be careful. And then the second thing, just a question you were talking about, as Guilford Public School staff finish their 2 weeks post-vaccine, that they wouldn't be subject to the closed exposure rules and have to quarantine. At the high school, do we anticipate that applying to those 16 and older who would be 2 weeks past vaccine in terms of students?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a really important question. So as we have students who are 16 and older who become fully vaccinated themselves, if we have a case where they could be a likely close contact, the contact tracing protocol, we will have to find ways to make sure that we're checking any student who themselves is 2 weeks beyond their second vaccination would likewise be excused from the need to quarantine. I do have to say that we have not worked out the logistics around this yet. So there may need to be a notification and response system put into place. So families may receive an initial notification of quarantine, and they may need to then respond and tell us, my child who just received the notification is fully vaccinated at this time. Share with us the confirmation of that, and then be excused or have the quarantine lifted. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to build a more proactive, if we're going to be able to build a system that doesn't require that kind of feedback. But either way, absolutely, a student who is fully vaccinated would not be expected to endure an unnecessary quarantine.
Go ahead, Mrs. Rader.
Thank you. Dr. Freeman, this is a question that's been posed to me a couple of times. I'm not sure how, I don't know if we've made a statement about this or not, is when, there's multiple like members of a household and someone is not feeling well, awaiting a COVID test result. Should the other household members who are students be going to school while, say, their sibling or their parent is awaiting to find out if they, are positive or not? I don't know how we.
Yes. Yeah, and thank you. It is a good question, and it has come up periodically. In most cases, the answer is yes. So again, it's following that chain of close contact. So if you've got 4 children in the Guilford Public Schools, and one of them is a 3rd grader, and we send you the letter to say that a student who is in class with your 3rd grader is a known positive, your 3rd grader would likely therefore become a close contact to that known positive. Your 3rd grader should quarantine for the full 10 days, not just by avoiding school, but actually quarantining, avoiding other unnecessary contacts. Your 3 other children were not in the 3rd grade classroom. They are a close contact to their sibling, but not to the 3rd grader who was positive. So those other family members should be able to continue normal activity and coming to school. The difficulty is that your 3rd grader should be quarantining from his or her siblings, right? So if your 3rd grader is continuing to have frequent and close contact with his or her siblings, and again, I think we were much more strict about this. I think families followed this more carefully in the early days of the pandemic. But based on the close contact identification, no, only your child who was exposed to that child. And that's why when the quarantine letters go out, only your child who was in that classroom with the known positive gets a quarantine letter. We don't send one to all of your other children who are known students, but not in the classroom with the known positive. I know how complicated that is. The best response I can give you is that when you find yourself in that situation, as a parent, you should be picking up the phone. You could be calling your school nurse, you could be calling your school principal, you could be calling Pam Nellerber, and we will make sure that we explain that and answer that in your specific case. That got a little bit difficult in these last weeks where we were processing 25 and 30 cases all at once. But at the level we're at this week, you should be able to get that kind of consulting and answer from a number of people within the school district around your specific case.
Thank you. I think like to kind of specify a little more is that I think there was some parents who were reaching out saying, one sibling is waiting on a test. They're not feeling well. They're getting, they're waiting on test results, but the other siblings are still going to school while that test is pending. And that's a gray area, right? And so you can't really say to a family, keep everybody home until that test result comes back.
Right. Again, the student who is symptomatic or the student about whom you're waiting to get your results, that student should not attend school until you know for sure that the student is negative. But the other students in that family should be free to continue coming to school. Now, if the sibling gets the test result back and it's positive, all siblings in that family would now be considered close contacts, and they would all need to remain at home until their own negative tests came back. And again, it does get confusing and it does get to be a little gray. And in individual cases, again, you can reach out to school employees or your own pediatrician to get a more specific answer to your individual case.
Other comments or questions for Dr. Freeman? No. All right. Thank you. Great. Great to hear that that the staff are well on their way to their second doses of the vaccine. That's obviously fabulous news, and also great news that we're seeing fewer numbers.
Which probably is also a good reminder that we should remind everybody that tomorrow is a scheduled distance learning day. We had more than 100 staff members who received their second dose today. Tomorrow is a pre-planned distance learning day, as we do have concerns about side effects and ability to staff tomorrow. So for those people who are watching this meeting live tonight, please be reminded that tomorrow is a distance learning day for all students in district.
All right. Dr. Freeman, are you set then on your report for this evening before I move on?
I am. Thank you, Dr. Bellister.
Okay, terrific. Next item on the agenda, 9.1, to act on personnel items. So we have 2 personnel items to act on. The first is to ratify the resignation for the purpose of retirement of the following teacher: Deborah Golembieski, who is at Leet Elementary School. Phys Ed, has provided 25 years of service in Guilford. Is there a motion to ratify this resignation?
So moved.
So moved, Dr. Best. I see a second. Certainly, Dr. Freeman, I hope you communicate our great appreciation for 25 years. That's wonderful.
Absolutely will.
All in favor? All right, I see all Board of Ed members' hands raised. The second is to ratify the resignation of the following teacher: Diane Stober, who is a technology integration instruction specialist with 2 years of service to Guilford. Certainly thanks to her as well. Is there a motion to ratify that resignation? Mr. Sands, then I see Mr. Del Ventura. All in favor? Wonderful. That is every board member present has raised their hand. Again, 9.2, we are going to put a hold on acting on the Board of Education statement. We will identify either a special meeting or the next time that we meet for a discussion of the Board of Ed statement on equity and social justice, and then a vote on that when we determine that we're ready to do that. Reports on committees. We are moving around rather quickly tonight. Policy Committee. Does the Policy Committee have a report for us this evening?
Nothing to report, just that our next meeting, committee meeting, is scheduled for April 26th.
Wonderful. All right. Mr. Sands, anything further from the Operations Committee?
No, not at this time.
All right, thank you. The Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee, any report from that committee?
Yes, we last met on March 22nd, and we had a great meeting discussing inquiry-based learning with 2 of our district math coaches. So it was a very informative meeting, very interesting.
Terrific. Thank you. Any liaisons to town committees? Any reports from town committees at this time? Okay, hearing none. And then Mrs. Peck is our liaison to the Learn Board of Directors, but could not be with us tonight. So I imagine that we will wait until next month from a report from the Learn Board of Directors. The next item is just my reminder to the community that we continue to encourage you to reach out to us with any kind of questions or comments or concerns. All of our emails are on the Guilford Public Schools website. I will just note in comment, I will be looking carefully into where we are as a state in terms of the extension of executive orders and when we might be expected to return to in-person meetings and what the parameters of those meetings will look like. So I will certainly provide an update to my colleagues here when I find all that information out. I think we can expect at some point fairly soon that there will be a return to public meetings, and we'll need to understand whether there'll be any different parameters around that than there were prior to the pandemic. But again, I will let people know that. We added an executive session to this meeting in order to briefly have a contract negotiation discussion. seeing that we have gotten through the other items, I am going to ask for a motion. Thank you, Mr. Del Ventura. Can I get a second to go in executive session? Great, Dr. Hirsch, thank you. I will note for the public that when we return to this public meeting, there will be no further discussion and no other votes. So that we will simply return from executive session to the public meeting and then adjourn. So I've gotten a motion and a second. All in favor of entering executive session? Okay, that is everyone. So I want to thank everyone else who joined us this evening. Thank you for participating. Thank you for listening if you're watching us via YouTube. And then those of us on the board will remain with Dr. Freeman for this executive session.
So Kevin, we can stop the broadcast, and then if you will just make me a host or co-host, I'll be able to close the meeting.